So today we're going to discuss students' rights, specifically for students with disabilities. Some of the topics we're going to cover are Section 504, IDEA, FAPE. We'll discuss the OCR and their involvement, as well as go over a court case of a school district that did not provide FAPE to a student that required it. So first up, we have Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act from 1973. We can see it's a federal civil rights law that prohibits discrimination based on disability in any program or activity operated by recipients of federal funds. So we'll go over what a recipient looks like, as well as what different federal funds and financial aid look like. It's important to note that under Section 504, a 504 plan includes accommodations and modifications within a general education setting, but it does not require a special education setting such as a 1211 or a 611 or other types of programs like that. So a recipient can refer to any state or its political subdivision. It includes public and private institutes, as well as different organizations that receives federal funds, or a person within a organization that receives the funds. It can also include a successor of that person. So federal financial assistance can be within a grant or a loan. It can also be federal personnel that is provided to support the recipient, and it can include property sold to the recipient for less than fair market value. So when we talk about a person with a handicap or a disability, it is something that prevents them or limits them from one or more major life event. So different types of handicaps and disabilities would be a physical impairment or a mental impairment. So physical impairments could look like anatomical loss, it could be cosmetic disfiguration, or a physiological condition. So this could be different types of students with like a student in a wheelchair. You could have a student with hearing loss, or a reading impairment. When we look at mental impairments, it could be emotional or mental illnesses. It could be a learning disability, and it could be mental retardation. So we could have things like bipolar or schizophrenia, ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, or a student with Down syndrome. When we talk about limiting a major life activity, one of those that could be something that is their ability to care for themselves or perform a manual task. It's something that would limit their ability for eating or breathing or walking, learning, hearing, talking, or their ability to work. So under Section 504, some of the things prohibited from a recipient is they cannot deny the benefit of a related service or an aid to a student with a disability. They cannot discriminate against a student with a disability. And they must also choose a location that is appropriate for all students. It's important to note, too, with a 504 that evaluations and placement procedures are required to ensure that a student is not misclassified or mislabeled, or they not put in an inappropriate classroom. So next up we have IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Here we see it is a federal law that makes available a free, appropriate public education to eligible children with disabilities throughout the nation, and ensure special education and related services to those children. We'll talk about what a related service is, and that the children can have access to. We should note too that under IDEA, an IEP is required, an individualized education plan or program. These are specific to each child, so it's not a general thing. So for an IEP, you would, during those evaluations and placement procedures, you would have the related service providers as well as teachers who set goals, measurable goals for each student based on their needs, and you would track the data to make sure that students are meeting their goals. Um, so some background history for IDEA. It was signed into law November 1975 by President Gerald Ford. When this happened, it opened the doors of public schools to millions of students with disabilities who did not have the opportunity before then to join their non-disabled peers in educational settings. It's also noted that this is in the least restrictive environment, meaning that students were included in the gen ed classrooms and they weren't just placed into special programming where they didn't get to join their peers. IDEA provides grants to recipients that helps with the special education programs. It helps with providing service providers. It helps with early intervention services, like programs such as Kid Start would be funded under this. Kid Start is a program where infants, toddlers can come to a school setting where they receive services to help them be successful in later years. It also provides grants to help with technical assistance. It helps with nonprofit organizations that support research, and it helps parents for parent training and information centers. It helps not only for their access to appropriate education, it also helps with ensuring that they have the opportunity for employment and their ability to live independently when the time comes. IDEA also not only protects the students' rights, it also protects the rights of the parents and caregivers that take care of disabled or handicapped children. It helps prepare educators and parents with effective tools to make sure that the children are being educated in the best way possible. So next we have FAPE, a free appropriate public education. This is available to all qualified persons with a disability within the jurisdiction of a school district. So again, it's a person with a disability is defined for a physical and mental impairment, which limits one or more major life activity. So under FAPE, it would be an appropriate education could be within regular classes within a gen ed with or without the use of related services and aids, or in a special education program with related services and aids as needed. This is not always in the classroom. It can also be done at home, and it is for both public and private institutions. So when we're referring to an aid that is provided to a student, it could be an interpreter. So if you have a student that is hard of hearing, you would have an interpreter to help them with understanding and hearing. Or you would have, for a student with a reading disability, you would have someone that is there to read to them, as well as a door-to-door transporter. So a student who has difficulty walking, whether they're in a wheelchair or a walker, they would have an aid provided to help them get on and off the bus and to move within the building itself. So related service providers can look like you would have your physical therapist who would help with gross motor skills. You would have an occupational therapist who helps with fine motor skills. You would also have speech therapists and possibly psychological counseling with psychologists, counselors, and also a necessary medical diagnostics as needed for a student. So you would have the different services. So we would have not only the service providers and aides, but you would also, again, have the IEP teachers that are, or any personnel that would be working with the student would have to be specifically trained. So your physical therapist, occupational, all of them would have specific training. The teacher would be a special education certified teacher. And you would also, again, have the appropriate materials for those students. So when we were mentioning least restrictive environment or inclusion, that would be to the maximum appropriate extent. So when we looked at the at IDEA, it had helped in FAPEs under that. So that went to, there's close to 7.5 million children that are now included in public schools and in gen ed settings. Most of them get to spend up to 66% of those students are now in the gen ed classroom for at least 80% of their day. So that would be the inclusion, is being in the gen ed setting, the least restrictive environment. When they're not in that setting, they would be in their special education program. For example, we have our 1211 in my district, and that they would get their tier 3 instruction there. So that tier 3 instruction helps to keep them on track with the peers in the gen ed setting so that they don't fall behind. When we look at the non-academics, so that would be their physical education, it would be organizations, extracurriculars, and sports that are sponsored by the school. The students must be able to be included with that. They must be able to have the same types of transportation that is appropriate for them. Special interest groups and clubs they must be included in, as well as they must be able to get referrals to agencies and assistance programs and equal opportunity for employment when the time comes. So some of those procedures that are set in place to prevent misclassification and inappropriate placement, we would have them done by the district. They're done at no cost to the parents. Parents must, or caregivers must, be notified and included in these decisions. They have the right to disagree or challenge an IEP or a placement. They can reject it if they choose to. And these procedures and reevaluations are done typically every 3 years. Sometimes if a student has outgrown their IEP or successfully met all of their goals, there is cases where they will be dismissed from needing to have these extra services. If that happens, the parents must be on board and agree with that decision. There's also some cases where evaluations and procedures are done more frequently based on the student's needs. The recipients or the districts must be using multiple sources in the evaluation and placement process. They would be looking at aptitude and achievement tests, as well as teacher recommendations, the physical condition of the student. You would look at their social and cultural background and their adaptive behavior for that based on their age and culture. These evaluations would be done by the trained professionals. So your therapist, again, your occupational, your physical, your speech, and the special education teacher, they would be the ones responsible for these evaluations, tracking the data, presenting that data, and helping to create the IEP as needed. They must be validated for the specific purpose that they are used, and they need to be designed to ensure that the results are accurate based on the needs of the students and their sensory, speaking, and manual skills. So you can't reflect their impaired skills. So you have a student in a wheelchair, you're obviously not going to assess them on their ability to walk down a straight line. So you need to accommodate these evaluations based on the student's abilities. Every now and then, when a district is not able to provide a free, appropriate public education, they will send a student to an outside institution that is better equipped. So you have, say, a autistic student that you feel would be more successful outside of the district. That is the responsibility of the recipient district to cover the tuition and expenses related to sending them there. Some things that they need to take into consideration is they cannot base this on discrimination. So just because a student is autistic does not mean you send them to an autism school. Same for deaf. You wouldn't just send them out of district to a deaf school. You need to take into consideration the proximity to home so that the students are not traveling for hours a day just to get to a different school. Um, the new facility must be comparable in the things that they have to offer as the home district would. And a lot of times this happens because of misclassification or inappropriate placement. So that's why these evaluations and placement procedures are important to be done accurately so that students are given the best opportunity possible. So there is times too where a parent may choose to have their child placed in one of these different institutions. If it's the parent's decision, then it is their responsibility to cover the tuition. It would not fall back on the district at that point. Mm. If a district, though, does choose to send a child to a school that is not local, so if they're rural and they don't have a specialty institution within a close distance, things like room and board are necessary, then the school would have to cover room and board and transportation and meals and things like that as well. Okay, so moving on, we have OCR, the Office for Civil Rights. So it is their responsibility to investigate claims and complaints of discrimination. Um, they have the authority to enforce Section 504. If they find that a district is not in compliance, they will attempt to bring them in for a voluntarily compliance through negotiation of a corrective action agreement. So with that, they'll bring the district, the recipient, in, and they will come to a agreement on things that they can change to try to improve um, what they have to offer to these students and ways to correct it. That would be a mild case. In a severe case, the OCR has the ability to remove personnel and educators from the recipient district and replace them with people who they feel are better equipped to make the student in school successful in providing them with what they need. So last, we will have Andrew F. versus the Douglas County School District. So Andrew is a child with autism. He attended public school from kindergarten through fourth grade. In April of 2010, Andrew's parents rejected the fifth grade IEP and proposed by the Douglas County School District. So the parents, when they went to the meeting, felt that the district had not changed his IEP enough for him to continue to grow. They felt that his learning, both academically and socially, had stalled at the school he was attending, and that the IEP just wasn't doing anything to encourage him to continue to grow. So, as a result, his parents pulled him from the school district and placed him in a school that specialized in autism. They felt that the Douglas County School had not provided FAPE and were requesting reimbursement for the tuition to the specialized school. They were denied by the school, so it went to a due process hearing. At the due process hearing, it was decided that the school had provided FAPE and that the parents would not be reimbursed for tuition. After that, they sought judicial review, where they agreed that the school had provided FAPE. And this was all done through the U.S. District Court of Colorado. So after that, they took it to the Court of Appeals in the 10th Circuit, where again, the parents were denied reimbursement, and it was decided the school had provided FAPE for Andrew. Finally, the parents appealed it to the Supreme Court. At the Supreme Court, they looked at what an FAPE is, They looked at what the school had done. They looked at the proposed IEP and eventually agreed with the parents that the school had failed to provide Andrew with an FAPE. And the parents did win, and they were reimbursed um, by the school district for the tuition. So that is our lesson on students' rights for students with disabilities. All right, thank you.